What up, guys? Welcome to Base Damage, and this week on Rogue Deck Reviews, we have another awesome deck sent in to us by Beanery. This is probably my 8th take of this because OBS doesn't like me. But this is over the series Sengoku Basara, the title of the deck being Manliest of Men in Weiss Schwarz. Now, because I've done this like 8 takes, I know almost all of these effects off the top of my head. Basically, Sengoku Basara, it was like a fighting anime where you had like all these different historical figures as far as all fighting each other, and it just was really over the top done for a lot of the action scenes. It was really cool though, and I liked it. So the set for this is a lot older, so it doesn't have a lot of the utility that we have nowadays, whether that be mill runners, clock bombs, and whatnot. As far as it's an outdated set, but this is still really nice, and depending on how you play it, you probably can still contend with a lot of other top tier decks. I say a lot of top tier, but don't expect too terribly much. Regardless, this is Rogue Deck Reviews. We don't give a shit about the meta, right? Anyway, getting right into this though, we are starting off with Man of Sea Motochika Chosakabe. Yeah, I'll get these names right eventually. His effect is actually really simple. A lot of these effects are fairly simple, but we're going to go through them as quickly as we can. It's a 002K, and if the number of your other characters on the field is 2 or less, he gets plus 1500 power, putting him at 35, which is pretty good for a beat stick. Excuse me. We got Cold-Hearted Sasuke Sarutobi. 2 effects. It's a global 500 to all of your other ninja characters, which sadly there's only one other ninja character in the deck. It's Dude Man right here. But either way, oh no, I say that, but then like this one's a ninja. But this buff is not going to matter for these nowhere near as much. So later on, it's only going to matter with this guy. So the secondary effect is a pay 1 stock to choose one of your opponent's front row level 0 or lower characters and send that character to the waiting room. Now, like I said, whereas this deck doesn't have mill runners or clock bombs or whatever, this deck doesn't give a shit. It's like, you know what? If I can't have them, you can't have them either. And this is one of the really awesome cards for that, to just get them out of the way. It was really cool to be able to see this. So definitely like this card. I'm already liking this deck so far just off of this one alone. This next one is mostly a back row character. It does get a 2000 buff if you have a Rose trait character, but I did not see Rose trait throughout this entire deck. So sadly, just the second effect applies, where if a character you control would be sent to the waiting room, you can sacrifice this and bring that character back to the same position it was on as rest. So by doing so, you can essentially encore without encoring. And that was my phone ringing. So that's actually really cool to be able to have some utility like that, because there are a bunch of characters in here that have like character encore and whatnot, but being able to do that without having to pitch extra from hand is really nice. So 2 copies of that. 2 copies of Strong Troops Rich Country Hideyoshi Toyotomi is the first brainstormer of the deck, and it's a unique brainstormer in the sense that, 1, it's spammable, and it's a buffing effect. It only counts himself for the buff. Basically, you pay 1 for every climax that you hit. You get to give himself a 3k buff until the end of the turn. So, you know, a single climax off of that turns him into a 55 because he's a 2/5, so plus 3k is 55. If you hit 2, that's an 85. That's actually really big. Not saying you're going to hit all of that too terribly much, but spammable brainstormers have their own really, really awesome utility in the sense that you can keep paying, clear out any climaxes that are in your stock, as well as mill through your deck really quickly. So, very nice effect, and being able to have this on a card that can get huge as fuck, even though it doesn't have any traits, is very nice, and I'm liking this. Next is 2 copies of Dragon's Claw Masamune Date 0025, that if the number of your other characters is 1 or less, he gives those other characters plus 500 power and character encore. So, if you drop both of them, or 2 copies of him for that, they're each 3Ks with character encore. It's actually kind of nice. But most of this level 0 stuff is just pure beatdown anyway, so fair enough. 4 copies of this Kusaga, which is a 0025. And her effect, if the number of your characters, number of your other characters is 2 or less, she gets plus 1,000 power and character encore as well. The character encore thing is a very much reoccurring thing. So more big beat sticks, and this basically gets just as big as this guy. So you drop like one of each of these on the field and just watch your opponent cry. So it's kind of cool in that regard, and being able to do that, as well as have the utility to mill through the deck really quickly and pop all the characters your opponent has that you don't want them to have on the field, whether that be stuff like Hibikis or Reversers or whatever. Really good to have. So I'm liking this so far. Level 1s, we get into Custom of Pirates, Motochika Chosakabe. If the number of your other weapon characters is 3 or more, he gets 1,000 power, and he inherently has character encore. So he could become a 5/5 with character encore. Nice. This card is basically the backbone of the deck from what I understand. Naive Personality Yukimura Sanada. And he's a 1/03K, so he's a back row character more than anything. He's a global 500 to all your other weapon characters, as well as the effect, you can pay 2 stock and rest him to salvage back a character from your waiting room. So there's no real big engine in this deck as far as getting the cards that you want, but this basically takes that role of the quote-unquote engine. So you just have to be really careful about how much stock you have, but for the most part, you're pretty good on a lot of it. You don't have to worry about too terribly big of a character stock payments until you hit level 2. And even then, you may save that for level 3 for a reason. So 4 copies of that, most definitely, and that is basically the engine of the deck, is this card right here. So getting into the next card, Unrivaled Bravery, Masamune Date, is the other brainstormer of the deck. So you got Dude Man right here, and then you have this guy. His ability is a pay 1 stock. It's also a spammable brainstorm, so this is really nice. For every climax you hit, you can choose one of your characters, and that character gets 1,000 power until the end of your opponent's next turn. So it's good both offensively and defensively. So 2 copies of that's really, really good for that. And once again, the spammable brainstormers just help you get through the deck so much quicker that it's insane. So I very much enjoy these, considering it's not like some BS effect. It's actually really cool. Preferably, I like search brainstormers and whatnot a lot better, but these still fulfill the roles that they are given. The last card for level 1s is God of War Kenshin and Sword Kasuga. This is the other ninja, so you only got 1 copy of this in the deck, but it's whatever. It's a 1/05K. If the number of cards in your stock is 5 or more, he gets a bonus 1,000 power. So if you fulfill that role, you have this, and you have Dude Man right here. He's a 65, but you only run 1 copy, so it's not a big deal. Going into the level 2s, we have just Masamune Date for the characters, but we do have some level 2 events, which we'll get to in a second. But he is a level 2, 2 cost, 8,500 power, 2 soul, and this guy has a really awesome climax combo with an interesting restriction, but it's understandable. When the climax gets played, which is a draw 2K and a soul, if the number of other characters you have in the front row is 1 or less, meaning basically you only have 2 characters in the front row for this ability to go off, him being part of that, you can look at up to 5 cards from the top of your opponent's deck, choose any number of cards amongst them, up to 5, and send those cards that you chose to the waiting room and send the rest of those cards back into the deck. And then all of your weapon characters get plus 2,000 power until end of turn. That's a really good buff that alone, if you have to give the 2K and a soul to someone else, he'll still make himself a 10/5 off of his own buff, which is really nice. Now, you're probably thinking, well, why can you only have 1 other character on the field? Read this effect as such. This is how I read this effect. Look at the top 5 cards of your opponent's deck, grab any climaxes that are amongst those 5 cards, put them into the waiting room, and shuffle the rest of the cards back into the deck. That's how I read that effect, and if you have 2 of him on the field when you do this effect, you get to do this effect twice. They each resolve in separate instances, but that makes it even better. It's, okay, well, assume that off of each of these effects, you get rid of at least 1 climax, maybe 2. Go, okay, use this effect, check top 5. 1 or 2 climaxes, out, the rest of the cards back into the deck. The second one procs, same thing. 1, you're getting a massive buff across the board, plus 4K, which is really, really nice. That makes him bigger than most level 3s before anything else. It also depends on which one you give the draw 2K and a soul to. But you've had 2 chances to check the top 5 cards to potentially get rid of several climaxes, which is if you... this being such a big probability and numbers game as far as trying to manipulate how often you cancel versus, being able to make certain that you ensure damage, this is in the latter half of trying to ensure that you do damage before you ever attack. This is all done during the climax phase. This is before anybody attacks. You could potentially get, 2 plus climaxes out, assuming you hit a climax with every single one of these effects. Now, where it gets broken is if you do have that many copies of this guy on the board. If you did have 3 copies of this and be able to do this 3 fucking times, that would be insane. So I understand the restriction behind it, and I can understand where they're coming from of only being able to want to attack with 2 characters. Otherwise, imagine if you could somehow magically get rid of all of the climaxes in your opponent's deck. They've just refreshed. There's like a full 8 climaxes in the deck, and you somehow hit like every single one of them off of these 3 effects. Holy shit, Batman. That's a lot of damage, and your opponent is going to cry. Like, just straight up. Like, it's a very powerful effect if you look at it in that regard. Sure, you can still get rid of other cards like, say your opponent has TLR, get rid of Darkness Plan. Or other cards you don't want them to draw into and or search. It's understandable where you probably want to get rid of some of those cards, but more often than not, what you want to get rid of is climaxes. It's like the Excalibur combo from the Saber with the Excalibur combo from Fate, where you can banish cards in your opponent's waiting room to memory. You're going to want to hit climaxes off of that, and that's where I look at this at. So, really awesome, very powerful effect, and if you underestimate this, it's probably going to hurt you. Anywho, continuing along the level 2s, we got these 2 counter events. So you can do this during your turn or your opponent's turn. Either way, this is really good. First off is Battle of Kawanakashima, is a 1-stock level 2 event that gives plus 1500 power to a character and gives them on reverse burn 1 for the turn. So that's really cool, offensively or defensively. You could go either way with that. Excuse me. And then you have Dragon in Right Eye, which it's free cost, but on play you can discard 1 card, heal 1, which is really nice, and then give one of your characters once a turn, if they would die, they come back. So if they would be sent to the waiting room, they come back as rested. More of a defensive card, but still being able to heal, if you absolutely need to, is very nice, and this is also one of those, you do not underestimate this card. So... definitely understand that this having 3 and 4 copies, most definitely needed for this deck. Even though this is an older deck, this seems like something you would see in newer decks, and I just don't see this a lot. This would be really cool to have, as far as some crazy shenanigans now. But that's it for the level 2s. Getting into the level 3s, we have Crimson Flame Yukimura Sonata, reminiscent of Last Shot Xenon if you follow these effects. 1, he's a heal 1 on play. You can also change into him as far as buy another card, but you don't run the change card for this one. So heal 1 on play, and the climax combo with Duel to the Death. So it's a 1k1 salvage trigger. When this attacks, if Duel to the Death is in the climax area, you can pay 3 stock, and if you do, burn your opponent for 5. And that's before he attacks. That's on attack, so that's before he deals his damage. So you could potentially burn for 5 and then swing for 3 damage at least, which is really nice. And one of the things I stated earlier is you could do this or this at level 3 depending on what the situation calls for, as well as depending on what climaxes you get in hand, considering they're both level 2s. Or they're both level 2s. Bleh. They're both 2 cost. What am I saying? They're both 2 costs, so it's as if this also gets just as big as most level 3s. You could play either of this at level 3 depending on what you see as necessary. But either way, I definitely like this. This is, like I said, this is essentially Last Shot Xenon. Whereas Xenon doesn't do as much damage in exchange for, if her damage gets canceled, she gets a buff. This does essentially 1 more damage. It has the chance of doing 1 more damage than Last Shot Xenon does. She has a chance to do 4 and then her own damage of 3, which is like a whole fucking level. So, either way, I definitely very much like this deck, dude. I realize we're going a little bit long on this, but definitely like this deck, and it by far has the Kool-Aid seal of approval on this. Even though this, I like to see older decks like this. One, I had never seen this set before prior to doing this video. All 8 takes of it at this point, or 6 or something like that. I forget how many. Anywho, 4 of the Salvage Trigger, 4 of the Draw 2K and a Soul for the climaxes. Thank y'all very much for watching. It is much appreciated. Please subscribe if you want to. If not, it's all good. If you have your own deck you want me to review, there is links in the description. 1, link for this deck. 2, link for the Discord. You can send them to me up there. There's a link for our Facebook page. You can send it to me up there. You can message over here. You can comment on this video if you want. By all means, there's several ways you can get your decks to me, and I can review them if you so want. It's much appreciated, and peace out for now.